class, Chapter 13 of Glass Houses. Morning. Out the porthole, she could see the thinnest, grayest line of a horizon. It was still very dark out, but she knew it would begin to get light before too long. She still couldn't see the water up close. What time was it? How long has she been here? Hours. Hours. Korak lay just the way he had. Buzz lay just the way he had. The two lay as if dead. She knelt again beside Korak and put her hands on his face. Without the dark eyes gleaming out of it, his face looked like a face chiseled out of stone. When she touched him, a muscle in his cheek responded, so she began to rub again and to speak to him. Please wake up, Korak. Oh, please. I love you, Korak. I need you to wake up. This time his eyes fluttered, though they closed again for a few moments before he seemed able to gather himself to open them. Oh, I'm so glad, she said. I was afraid you were never going to wake up. Oh, Korak, I don't know what to do. I suppose it's too late to stop her. He lay still for a few moments, putting it together. Okay, baby, he said at last. I need to know some things, Korak. I need to know how you got on the boat. She could see he was still having trouble focusing his eyes on her. He smiled, a wry smile, and sat up slowly. Ah, he said, how I got on the boat. You said you had helicopters. You had a helicopter business. Was it on a helicopter? Correct. You have to tell me this. It won't do any harm for you to tell me. What harm will it do? I already know enough to send you to jail. What harm will it do to tell me just a little more? I didn't mean that. I wouldn't send you to jail, but I really do need to know. I have a special reason. He laughed and chucked her under the chin. First, tell me your special reason, he said. Were you in on Buzz's plan? Tell me, Cork. I need to know. Nope. Was Olivia? Depends on what you mean in on. I mean, did Buzz know she was in on his plan? Was she his partner? Nope, it doesn't look like Olivia was anybody's partner. She had a special reason for knocking you out, correct. She said she was going to meet you in Cairo. Again he laughed and cuddled his arms around her comfortably. You see, she said specifically, what I need to know is how she got away from here and where she's going. And I need to know if she's a spy. And I need to know if you're a spy. You're a funny little duck. What I was thinking was that maybe it didn't have anything at all to do with spy stuff. Maybe it was just stealing. I was thinking that maybe Buzz had a plan to steal Barney, and maybe Olivia got suspicious of him, and maybe she hired you and your helicopters to help her steal it away from him once he got it. His look deepened. Very good, he said. You're very good. And then she must have used one of the helicopters to steal it herself. But, you see, Korak, there's something you don't know. She's not interested in the Yeti anymore. She's got some important papers. I can't tell you what they are, because I don't know what side you would be on. I'd be on your side, he said, kissing her on the forehead, gently. She melted. Then she pulled herself back. It's important, she said. This is important, correct. You've got to stop her. Okay, he said, but I want you to tell me a little more first. I can't. Just a little more. How can I help you if I don't know what I'm doing? You said you were a businessman. That's right, he said. Odd jobs. If I hired you, I wouldn't necessarily have to tell you all the details, would I? I'll bet Olivia didn't tell you all of the details. Correct. There are 4 dead men up on deck. At this, he pulled himself up straight, tense. 4? Besides poor Buzz, all I want you to do is to find out where she went and stop her. You need to do that anyway. Did you kill all those men, Coric? She could feel his unsteadiness as he got up and headed for the cabin door. Let's take a look, he said. She had managed to bash the door down with the same brass implement Olivia had used to bash Coric, and it swung loosely open on its hinges, the catch mauled beyond repair. I couldn't figure out how to get the radio going, she said, and I was afraid if I did I might be telling that submarine how to find us. Buzz was supposed to have rendezvous with a submarine. I suppose you know all that. And also, I didn't know how to slow the boat down or stop it, so I tied the steering wheel to make it go around in circles. I want to see those dead men, he said grimly. She took him to the first. He lay across the railing just outside the cabin door. Coric hardly looked at him. No, the others, he said. You must have been fighting while I was in the cabin with Buzz, she said. We didn't hear you at all. You must have caught them by surprise. Had you planned to kill them, Coric? Did you know ahead of time it was going to be this kind of fight? But he didn't answer. He glanced at the second and third men who lay in the space between the railing and the cabin on the deck and looked immediately away, his face expressionless. Any more, he said. One more. She took him to the Oriental boy, who lay among the litter of boxes where the Yeti's cage had been. He knelt and very gently pulled the body around so he could see the face, and then laid it out straight. Baco, he said, almost under his breath. She killed Baco. Why'd she have to do that? He walked then into the captain's cabin, where the radio was, and the big steering wheel, stepping over the body of a man without glancing at it. Marilyn, too, stepped over it to follow him. He twisted the dials expertly, getting the radio to hum. Then he began to speak into it in quick, singing tones. Korean? Chinese? A voice crackled back at him in the same language, and the two carried on a rapid conversation. Okay, he said finally, switching the radio around from one spot to another. It looks like we're in luck. Olivia, calling my dear friend Olivia. Olivia, come in. You went the wrong direction, honey. You've been flying around in circles, and you're going to run out of gas pretty soon. Hey, Olivia, baby, I paid through the teeth for that old rattletrap. Don't you want to put it down in a good, safe place for me? Finally, Olivia's voice came crackling through in answer. Milton, love, it's perfectly charming of you to rescue me. I hope you understand that there was absolutely nothing personal in that little tiff we had. I've been regretting it, dear. No hard feelings? Of course not. Look, you only have about 30 minutes of airtime left. That's just about enough to get you to the coast if you follow my directions exactly, okay? Of course, dear. You know I love to follow directions, and I'm really very good at it. Fire away. All right. You know that little stick in front of you? The one with the red knob? Wrong. There are two with red knobs, and neither one of them is in front of you. But, my dear, I can see very well that the knob is in front of me. Turn around and face front, Olivia. Sorry, dear. It was just a bit breezy out that open doorway. How do you shut the door on this thing? You don't. If I sit facing front, I get the most awful feeling of inadequacy. Olivia, do you want to get out of this alive? I'm facing front, dear. I was just explaining my predicament. All right, the stick in front of you. I see it. I want you to pull it very gently back. I tried that, dear, and the most awful things happened. Gently. All right, You know I trust you, Milton, but do be careful you tell me to pull the right sticks. Sure thing, baby, sure thing. Olivia, said Marilyn, is Barney all right? Why, that's little Marilyn, isn't it, little Marilyn? And you're worried about that big lunk? Yes, as far as I know, he's all right. But I really think he's responsible for my problem in steering this thing. Are you certain this machine is adequate to carrying such a heavy cargo, Milton? Couldn't that be my problem? Hang on to him for a while anyway, baby, said Kara. Correct, you'll make it. The damp sea wind was making its way into the cabin as a dead body got in the way of shutting the door. Marilyn felt lucky it wasn't colder, but she shivered anyway. After all, she had only her little pink suit on. Korak put his arm around her, and she unbuttoned his overcoat and snuggled inside it against him. She wrapped her arms inside his suit jacket, her hands against his shirt. A quivering wave traversed his back like the back of a pony. She felt his heart beating, beating. Was it his heart, or was it her heart? The heart that was beating rippled the edges of both their bodies in the place where the two bodies pressed together. She tasted the skin of his neck. It was salty. His muscles relaxed again and held her ever so lightly. You should stay away from me, he said softly in her ear. I'm not your kind of man. You love me, she said. I know you do. He made a small noise that was like an animal cry. He, sure of herself now, she touched his head to pull it down to hers, and once again she entered that floating kingdom of his lips, his teeth. She felt him trying to pull away from her. She was hanging over into the abyss. She felt herself sliding willingly, helplessly, into the black passion of selflessness, the black terror of love. I would die for you, she said. He pulled sharply away from her. The space between them was cold and lonely. The light overhead threw a harsh light on his face. His face was altered. The radio crackled somewhere in the distance, but neither of them heard it. Were you the one who put this on me? She said, holding the little metal thing Buzz had gotten so upset about up to the light. Yes, he said. I thought so. When did you put it on? When you laid out my clothes for me to take my shower that night? Why did you put it on, Korak? So you could follow me? What is it? A tracking device? Why? Are you a spy? No, I don't think so. Did Olivia pay you? Yes, she hired you, didn't she? She wanted to find out more about Buzz's plans. She thought he'd be using me. She was suspicious about the necklace. The necklace weighed heavy on her now, and she put her hand to it. I'm sorry, Korak said. I wouldn't have hurt you. And you used this little thing to follow me to the hotel. Then you told Olivia where I was, because that was your job. And she told Carol Peabody. And when you saw my room, you thought Olivia must be double-crossing you, trying to trick some kind of information out of me behind your back. But you were kind of scared, weren't you, when I wasn't in the room? You couldn't follow me because I'd left my bra behind. You were kind of scared I wouldn't come back. Kind of sorry. You were kind of glad to see me. Just a little. I mean, apart from cloak and dagger stuff. At that, he grabbed her to him in a swift motion and held her as if it was his own sweet life he was holding. When he finally released her, it was stiffly, as if the muscles to hold and the muscles to release were both pulling, both fighting to win control over his arms. My man is here, he said thickly, and then into the radio. You're doing fine, Olivia. Just keep doing exactly what you're doing right this second. I'm going to sign off now for a few minutes, but I'll pick you up again in a minute. Milton, said Olivia's voice, are you certain it's wise to leave me? My dear, you never know when I might unaccountably make a mistake. My relationship with machines has never been exactly smooth. You'll be okay, Olivia, he said, and clicked the knob off. Then he let his eyes pass swiftly through Marilyn, swirl around and through her, and rest for a moment on the skin of her neck. I'll be back for you, he said. Wait here for just a few minutes and I'll be back. I have to come with you, Korak. Oh, you'll never know how much I want to be back here already, but trust me, trust me. Korak, I need to come. You don't understand. But his great strength stepped out onto the deck without really noticing her tugs and calls. He was preoccupied with the battering winds of an old green helicopter that now hovered over their heads, its enormous noise competing with the noise of the wind and the sea and the boat in their love. Out of the window of the helicopter a young man leaned, and she saw, in the dim morning light, it was Cabato, the waiter from Takis. His young pink face stared fiercely down on them from the great doorless cavity of the helicopter, past him to the body of the young Oriental man on the deck. That's his brother, said Korak, and waved farewell in a grim salute to the dead boy before he swung himself up on the ladder that swung down from the great machine. Wait, Korak! But he paid no attention to her. However, her reflexes were getting better, and she grabbed the last rung of the ladder just before the small craft swung sharply up and away from the ill-fated boat, which kept plowing forward anyway to make its lonely circles in the sea. What a stupid thing to do! But it was done, and quickly, irrevocable. For the second time in 3 days she found herself hanging high in the air, but this time she felt quite calm. The ocean waves slapped themselves not so very far below her, their damp breath coming up to her, salty, cool. The wind pulled at her like a rough but painless caress, tossing her. If she'd been tossed in this way as part of a game, she would not have minded it at all, and this is how she tried to think of it now. Think of the speed as a roller coaster speed. Think of the wind as a skiing wind, the cold as a swimming cold. She'd swum in cold lakes, cold creeks, even a cold ocean without minding it. Above her, the helicopter's green paint was peeling. She could see some old numbers showing through what looked like an amateur effort to cover them. Were the helicopters legal? Had he bought them from army surplus or something? This one looked old enough. She waited a moment to get her strength and then chinned herself, only to jerk back down in the wind and rain. The second time she was able to hook an elbow in the rung, and gradually after that, using all her concentration, managed to hoist herself up one more ring so she had something to hook her legs into. After that she was secure. She was getting tough. Should she make her way to the top of the ladder and join Korak and Kabato? The fact that she wasn't immediately hauled up had to mean they didn't know she was there. And maybe that was just as well. Korak was, after all, a crook. He had, after all, gotten himself involved in a plan to steal the Yeti from Buzz. He was on the other side. The sky was becoming softly light in the way it is just before the sun comes up. What time was it? Surely it must be past 5. Even if Olivia wanted to now, it didn't seem possible that she could deliver the transcript to anyone who could threaten peace. And every minute they were flying made it that more unlikely. She lost track of time flying that way. the way one loses track of time waiting for something important to happen or waiting to fall asleep. There were no guidelines to tell her how long this trip was taking. It seemed hours, but it couldn't be because she had heard Carrick tell Olivia there was only a half hour's fuel left in her helicopter. Maybe she had gone a long ways away, though, and they were speeding to where she would have landed. And then, suddenly, there wasn't water under her anymore. Arlington Cemetery was under her. Surely Olivia hadn't wanted to come here. And then it was the Potomac River and Potomac Park, and then she saw the Washington Monument. Marilyn didn't want to understand, but it was unavoidable. Olivia had wanted to stop peace. When she found the coastline, she had followed it here in her desperation, and Corrick must be tracking her here. And there she was, suddenly beside them. There was the old helicopter, just like the one Marilyn was hanging from, and there was Barney, his cage suspended from it by a cable. Marilyn could see through the glass that he was crouching on his floor. He must be terrified. And there was Olivia. She sat exposed in the open doorway in the pilot's seat. And then a spot of red appeared on Olivia's neck. Marilyn squinted to see better. A spot of red that grew, and Olivia's helicopter lurched sharply, just the way her own big Cadillac lurched. And underneath it, the Yeti's cage lurched. And then the helicopter shuddered, just the way Olivia's Cadillac would shudder if she tried to pull it in two ways at once. The red spot was growing still, spreading down Olivia's shoulder. The Washington Monument glowed pink below them in a dull spire, as if to reflect the red from Olivia's shoulder. But of course it was really the sunlight that shone there, peeking over the horizon of the earth to touch the Washington Monument. Olivia's craft dipped as if it were rocking on an invisible sea. The cage below swung perilously near the Washington Monument, and a moment later Marilyn herself was swung after it, skimming past the cool pink marble that became clear and real for a moment as she passed it. Then another lurch, and the Yeti's cage actually slid across the top of a rolling knoll, sweeping the snow off it like a broom. Jesus, please, Jesus, don't let Barney be hurt. But in another moment, the cage was gently scraped along the ground, and then Olivia's helicopter tipped over on its side, and that was the end of its whirring and spluttering. It tossed around like a petulant child, and then it lay still. Cabato and Corrick were swinging their helicopter around closer, and when they had come fairly near the wreck, Marilyn jumped off. The ground was harder and closer than she had anticipated. She rolled in the snow like a puppy. When she could right herself, she scrambled to the helicopter. She needed two things. She needed the transcript, and she needed Barney to be all right. Barney's cage was rumpled, and she could hardly bear to look in it, so she glanced in the helicopter first. Olivia lay silent and still in the wreckage. There was a knife sticking from her neck. Cabato. Cabato with his knives. Cabato with his dead brother. Couldn't he wait for his revenge? Couldn't he wait until the Yeti was safe? And Corrick. Why hadn't Corrick stopped it from happening? She suddenly hated Corrick with all the intensity that she had spent in loving him. He had let Cabato put revenge above the Yeti. They didn't care about the Yeti at all. It was only money to them. If they couldn't get the money, they wanted to make sure Olivia wouldn't live to incriminate them at the cost of Barney's life. She stepped closer into the wreck. In Olivia's dead hand was the transcript. She must have been planning to toss it out. Where? The Russian embassy. It was only a few blocks further. She couldn't stand the idea of the detonations in England. She was a crook, but she was a patriot. She would have thrown the transcript into the courtyard of the Russian embassy, and maybe they would have taken it seriously, coming as it did from someone in possession of the Yeti, voluntarily flying over the city again. There might have been the preemptive response Jason feared, but would it have been in time? Surely not. Surely not. Even now the sun was rising, casting its light on Olivia in the helicopter in the snow. She took the transcript out of the dead hand. It had blood on it. Then she turned and met the eyes of Cabato. "No," she said. She wheeled and saw that Korak was standing on the other side of her. "Give it to them," something inside her said. "What harm can it do now?" But she couldn't. "You can't have it," she said, and scrambled over the wreckage to the other side and began to run as fast as she could in the snow. But she didn't get very far. Cabato had her. She wiggled out of his little arms and fell, turning up to look at him. He stood over her, a little oriental smile on his face, his hand extended for the transcript. And behind him stood Barney. Barney, looming strangely bright against the winter sky, against the snow. Barney, confused, maybe hurt. Dear, sweet Barney. Cabato didn't turn. His entire focus was on Marilyn. What did he think was in that envelope? Money? What kind of treasure did he think was in that envelope? He made a grabbing motion for it, and Marilyn scooched back. Then he grabbed her foot. That was a mistake. With a great roar, Barney picked him up and tore him in half. The two pieces of Cabato dropped down in the snow. The spatters of warm blood melted little holes all around them. Marilyn stood up. Facing her was Korak. Between them was Barney. She lifted her hand and jingled Buzz's necklace. Barney instantly crouched down and crept towards her, whimpering. He was, after all, terrified. He had, after all, just been through a grueling experience. She stood for a long moment without moving and looked at Korak, who stood still, too. He had a faint smile on his lips. She felt something snap inside her when she wheeled away some gear, some connecting part. Barney followed her meekly, at first at a little distance and finally holding her hand. "Good boy, Barney," she said. "That's a good boy. It's going to be okay. Come on, let's go." And at last he stood upright and walked beside her, allowing her to hold a great finger. After they had gone a few yards, she turned and looked at Korak again. He was still standing where he'd been. Some people were running towards them from several directions. "Come on, Barney," she said, and they began their walk to the White House. Marilyn didn't feel the cold of the snow on her ankles. Her blood surged warmly through her. What she felt was Barney's great rough hand against hers, and through it his trembling fear. She knew he couldn't see very well in the light, which was just as well, because great crowds of people were beginning to surge around the White House from the other side, where they had been waiting for the grotto to open. She called to an official-looking man who got fairly close to her. "Keep them back. I'm going to take him through the White House. Keep everyone back." "Do you want tranquilizers?" he shouted. She had heard that Barney's system was too delicate to use the tranquilizers without risk. "No, I think I can handle him," she called. "Just keep him back." As soon and soon police were there to hold the crowds away, and she and Barney walked through the snow as if they were the only two creatures in the world. You think you're safe from me because you're my friend now, she said. That's the same kind of mistake I always make. I always thought if people loved you, they'd protect you and not hurt you. I expected them to take care of me. But it's not true. And I'm just as bad. I love Korik, but did I go over to his side when he needed me to? No, of course I didn't. I thought his side was wrong, so I didn't go over to it. If they get just the tiniest little suspicion you might be wrong, they'll desert you. And it'll be worse than if you'd never had a friend. You're better off being a wild animal, Barney, and being scared of everybody, because they're all just like me. If you trust them, they'll lead you right back to a cage. The White House gates stood open for them, and Marilyn trotted beside Barney across the wide White House lawn. It was a little difficult to coax him into the building itself, because people were still scampering away down the halls when they looked in the door, and the echoing panic frightened him. However, she talked soothingly and jingled her necklace when he wanted to bolt, and she got him in. He walked carefully on the slick floors, ducking away from the walls. The halls weren't really empty, but they were cleared away by Barney's approach, as if he had blown them away with his great grunting breath. When they got to the hallway leading to control, though, the doors were locked. Marilyn knocked and rattled the knob, but to no avail, and finally she was forced to let Barney open them for her. He did, with a great clatter that sounded around her ears like a battle, but nothing scared her any more. She was beyond fear. As she approached control, several aides hurried towards her. You can't go this way, one said. He spoke as if there were no great creature holding her hand, but only another bureaucrat. What way can we go? Said Marilyn. You'll have to go round. That's simply not possible, said Marilyn. We're going this way. You'll just have to keep everyone quiet and make sure the door into the grotto is open for me. We'll have to tranquilize him, said the man. The president is in there. Tell the president to sit still and keep quiet. He can't see much in this light. I'll just take him on through. It was not the firmness of her voice, but the fact that she just kept walking and they were not big enough to stop her that got her way. They weren't prepared for invasion from this end. The doors wouldn't hold against him, and as she had hoped, they weren't willing to take the risk of tranquilizing him either. Righto, said the aide. We're moving everybody out of your way. But getting through control was another story. They'd been right. She should never have taken him in there. Control was an enormous room with great screens lighting up the walls near the high ceiling, depicting in living color maps and charts and graphs of various sorts. There were tapes whirling on the walls and lights flashing and buzzers buzzing. Everybody in control sat silently in their places, just as she'd asked. But Barney, once in the door, wouldn't budge. He stood rooted to the spot, and she could hardly blame him, because overhead in great red numbers a giant clock was ticking off the seconds of the countdown. They hadn't detonated yet. When she saw the reflected glint of the rising sun on the buildings, Marilyn had assumed the piece had gone off. But she was wrong. Only now were the final seconds ticking to a close. Why hadn't they warned her? She could have waited another 30 seconds. But of course she hadn't given them a chance. She just barged straight on through. Come on, Barney, she said desperately. Come on, let's get going and you'll be home, Barney. Home. Dinner. And she took the necklace off and rattled it right in his ear. That did the trick. He stood up again, close to her, and allowed her to lead him into the room. But just as she reached the door to the adjustment room, the 10-second warning went off. The red light beside the president's chair began to flash on and off. The buttons, which he was supposed to push, began to buzz and flash. Barney growled, and before she could stop him, he moved towards the president. 4 special servicemen grabbed him away from his chair. All of them went sprawling together as Marnie took an in general swipe at the area they were vacating, just missing the president. And then Marnie stopped at the president's desk. He touched the flashing red light, and he touched the flashing buttons. One by one, he touched the buttons. He detonated peace. There was a stunned silence in the room, and every eye turned up to the great boards. Even Marilyn, who had just seconds too late reached Barney and quieted him with the necklace, turned to look at the boards, and as they watched, one little spot lit up here, and another there. Kamchatka, a voice announced soberly over the PA, south of India. An underwater detonation in the North Pacific, sir. That was one of ours. A Polaris submarine, sir, the Urchin. And that was all. They waited in silence, but that was all. Are all systems functioning? Asked the president. Yes, sir, all systems functioning, but that's all, sir. I mean, that appears to be all the warheads that were armed. That's ridiculous, said the president. What a ridiculous thing to say, Porter. Our information, sir, was that the Russians had armed, that all the sites we had mentioned, sir, but our information was based on extrapolation, sir. Mr. President, we just assumed they were armed, sir. There was a long silence. In back of the silence was the whirring of machines and the murmuring of electronic voices and the breathing of Barney. Finally, a giggle escaped from Wells. They weren't armed, he said. They weren't armed. Nobody was armed. Nobody in the whole world was armed. They didn't believe we would ever attack them. And they sure as hell weren't planning on attacking us. It was all a front. It was all to keep us from getting any ideas. They were scared to arm anything for fear of accidents. And then he laughed, a marvelous, contagious laugh that produced a smattering of snickers in response. But it took a little while for the laughing to get going because these men had worked too hard to turn their minds around right away to defeat. And Marilyn, at last, coaxed the Yeti into his grotto, just in time for the masses of customers to watch him sleep for 12 solid hours. How is your wife? Marilyn asked Jason. His face was worn with worry, but he managed to smile. I don't know how to tell you this, Marilyn, he said, but I had to do a lot of thinking last night, a lot of thinking, and I realized I just hadn't given it a chance, You're going to try to make her happy, she said. I mean, it's just on a trial basis, you understand. Good, she said. She walked back over to the area near the Washington Monument where the crash had been. Olivia's helicopter had been roped off, and the crowds of people were too thick for her to get close and look at it, but she didn't want to look at it anyway. Korek's helicopter wasn't there. She asked one of the policemen, and he didn't know anything about it. So far as he knew, there'd never been more than one helicopter. Later that day, she thought she saw Korek standing in a doorway near the Fenway building, watching her. She ran through the soft snow, calling, Korek! Milton Korek! But when she got there, the doorway was empty. The place where he had been was a shadow. She reached in her blouse and unslipped the little metal object that had cost her so much trouble. Korek, she said into it. Korek, I think I'll go home to Casper, Wyoming. Wouldn't you like to come along? It would be different for you, but you might like it there. I guess maybe you wouldn't. It would be too different. You wouldn't be able to get used to it. She kissed the little clip and put it back on her bra. Well, she thought, it's only love. It will pass.